Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the Untangle Tech Talk webinar series. Today we'll be showcasing how you can install and configure our Untangle NG Firewall solution. My name is Shannon Bonfiglio, and I'm part of the marketing team here at Untangle, and I'll be your host today. I also have with us Eric, who is one of our sales engineers, and he's going to take us through this presentation as well as a demonstration. Now, just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. Please be sure you're selecting the correct audio preference. On the right-hand side, you'll see the option to use your computer mic and speakers. Please be sure you have a strong internet connection for that, as well as you can also use a telephone. You will need to use the access code that is provided. As always, this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch or revisit areas that you want to follow up on. It'll be posted on the Untangle YouTube channel within 24 hours after this event has ended. As always, we have a few staff members on hand to help with answering any questions. So please be sure to submit those questions in the Q&A box on the right-hand side, and we'll try and get to all of those. Just a reminder, or just a note, that this is a Tech Talk series. So this is a very technical webinar. So if you're unfamiliar with Untangle or networking solutions, then this webinar may not be ideal for you, as we're going to get into some deep technical topics here shortly. So we do have more higher level webinars. Our 101 series covers more high level topics. So those might be better if this is technical networking scenarios are not for you. So just wanted to kind of give everyone a little warning on that. I believe that's it. So I'll pass it over to Eric now.
Thanks, Shannon. So before we actually start talking about the actual setup of the Untangle NG Firewall, the first thing that you need to keep in mind is, how are you planning to deploy this device? And really this comes down to just one question. How is it going to be put in place? Is it going to be in router mode, or is it going to be in bridge mode? And while that seems on the surface at least to be a relatively simple question, there's a lot of things to keep in mind. Most importantly of which is, do you actually have a public IP address that is provided by your ISP and then directly into your network, or are you behind a router or other device from your ISP that's giving you a private IP address? And the reason why that's important is that is the primary consideration to take and keep in mind when we're talking about router versus bridge. If you have a public IP address being fed directly from your ISP to whatever the next gateway device is, in this case the Untangle, you really need to put us in router mode, because that's the only way that you can protect that network behind the Untangle and prevent it from having full exposure to the internet. In bridge mode, the assumption is you're behind another device that's already handing out a private 192.168 or 10 dot IP address. And in that case, the Untangle actually should be in bridge mode. And the reason for that is when it's not in bridge mode, the Untangle is going to try to assign another different private subnet to your network. And that can cause some issues if you're in a pre-existing configuration in regards to multiple layers of NAT, a network address translation. So when you first power on the Untangle, you're immediately presented with a setup wizard to help you configure the Untangle most basic settings and ensure that it's going to work the first time that you actually try to connect devices into it. The setup wizard is broken up into about 5 or 6 different steps. Those steps are setting your password for the admin login. That password will be used for both the web facing interface, the GUI, as well as the backend command line via SSH. From there, you get a screen that shows you all of the interfaces that are available on your Untangle, and it also shows you which one you're currently connected into. The reason for that is if you don't want to use the first interface on the Untangle as your external public-facing connection, you have the ability in that screen to rearrange them to work the way that you want them to. From there, we go right into configuring your external network. This is where you set your ISP settings, or again, like we said before, if you're in bridge mode, this is where you would configure either a DHCP connection or whatever you need to set up so that it can connect to the upstream device. Once you've added those settings into that screen, you have the option to test the internet connection. And then from there, you can proceed on to your internal network. On the internal network screen, it's fairly similar to the external, other than you've really only got two settings, IP address and subnet. Additionally, in this screen, you have the option to enable transparent bridge mode. This can be changed after you finish the setup wizard, but generally speaking, it's easiest and best if you know how you need to configure the device ahead of time to do it here. Once those settings have been changed, the final step is checking whether or not you actually want to have the system automatically check for upgrades, or if not. If not, you would have to go into the upgrade screen and manually update it yourself. Additionally, on this screen is the option to connect to our command center. That is the option that the Untangle uses to connect to your command center account so that you can manage subscriptions as well as some other things that we'll get into later. So after you finish the setup wizard, you'll be presented with a screen to register the device if it hasn't already been done ahead of time. And then once that's done, you'll immediately get asked if you want to install the recommended set of applications for the Untangle. We recommend that you actually do that unless you have a very specific use case in mind. Most of the applications that you see on the screen to the right here are our recommended applications. And again, you can, of course, come in after the fact if you've decided that there are certain ones that you just don't need after you've started playing and configuring with the Untangle device. You can come in and easily remove them. Once you've done that, the next step, generally speaking, is to go in and install and configure intrusion prevention. This will protect your network as well as the Untangle from outside intrusion attempts. Other things that you can set up from this point are things like your email settings. You can go in and add the email address that you want the Untangle to send admin alerts to. You can set the from address that these alerts will be sent from in the Untangle. You can also set your host name for the device as well as configuring the alerts. Then we move on into the advanced configuration options. And this is where you actually set up the primary firewall configuration settings on the device. This is the layer 3 configurations as opposed to the applications at layer 7. In the config network settings screen, you have access to several different configuration options, including, and certainly not limited to, setting up your quality of service. So if you want to prioritize your traffic, make sure that the right amount of bandwidth is being assigned to each interface. DHCP server, that screen allows you to go in, set up static leases for your machines on the network that are getting IPs via DHCP. Port forwards, NAT rules, bypass rules. Bypass rules are really important, especially at the beginning, especially if you have devices that you do not want to be filtered by the Untangle. Some great use cases here are VoIP phones. Several IoT devices don't play well with layer 7 applications. One thing to keep in mind, bypass rules only bypass the application layer. They do not bypass anything else that you set up in this screen. And then, of course, there's also filter rules here. The filter rules are the foundational firewall rules, if you will, similar to ACLs and general firewall rules that you may be familiar with. Some of the things to point out here that you'll notice on this screen, in your interfaces tab, after you've configured the individual interfaces in the setup wizard, or if you have more than just an external and an internal, all of your interfaces. If you click on one of the interfaces, you'll notice down here in the corner a status screen. What that provides is a very quick view of the current status of that device, of that particular port, that interface on the Untangle device. It'll show you the IP address. It'll show you the MAC address if you need it for configuring a device you're connecting to it, as well as showing you the receive and transfer rates and any error packets that are happening on that interface. The other screen that you see at the bottom here, the ARP entries, that's just a quick view so you can see the MAC address and IPs of any devices that are connecting via that interface. Some other things to keep in mind when we're creating rules in the Untangle. In nearly all cases, port forwards, NAT rules, bypass, and filter rules, you're going to see conditions talking about source versus destination. And those are important distinguishing conditions. And the reason for that is the source and destination is going to vary depending on whether where the traffic's originating and where it's going. So that brings up the question of client versus server connections. A client on, as far as the way that we're looking at that traffic, is where the traffic is originating. So in the case of traffic originating on the local network, the machine that is making the request, for example, out to a website, would be the client. And the server would be the IP address for the URL that they're requesting. So if you wanted to create rules to restrict access to specific places on those ports, the source in this case would be the client internal machine, and the destination would be the server external host IP address. The reason why I point this out is there's two different directions that traffic can pass. So when we're talking about things like port forward rules, those rules get reversed because then we're talking about inbound traffic. Then the client becomes the server outside of the Untangle out on the internet, and the server becomes the device that it's going to. So those are just things to keep in mind when we're trying to set up these different rules. So after you've gone through and configured all of the different baseline settings that are on the Untangle, the next place to look is our command center. The command center is the cloud-based global management system that we provide to all of our customers. This allows for many things, actually, but most importantly, it provides a means of secured remote access to your device from anywhere in the world, literally. You can connect into an appliance without having to have to open up a port. Zero-touch provisioning. If you have the serial number of a device that you've purchased, prior to you receiving that device, you can come into Command Center and you can register that device to your account. And then from there, you can very quickly and easily assign subscriptions to it. If you have other devices in place and you've created what are called policy templates, basically those are configurations from a device already connected to the Untangle, you can assign that policy to this new device. And what will happen is as soon as that device is online and has been registered to your account, it can get that configuration quickly and easily. So you don't have to duplicate that work. And then the third thing is we've just recently integrated with Malwarebytes. If you have a Malwarebytes cloud solution, cloud service rather, you can input that account in your command center, and then we can show not only statistics for individual hosts, but you also have the ability to run virus scans and other things on those hosts remotely when you're not on the network, to make it very quick and easy for you to administer those endpoints. So now that we've talked about all these different things, I'm going to go ahead and walk through how this actually looks on an Untangle. As I said, the first thing that happens when you set up a Untangle device is you get sent right directly into the setup wizard. This happens as soon as you power on the device and either connect a monitor, keyboard, and mouse into that device, or you connect a computer into the internal interface and assign it an IP in the subnet that you have defined on that interface. Select the language that you want to use and hit continue. And then run Setup Wizard. This first screen is really important. This is the screen where you define the password for the admin account. Of course, you'd have to confirm it as well. And where you define the admin email. This email address will automatically be set as the user that will receive all alerts and report summaries from the Untangle. You do have the ability to create additional admin users and or report users to receive those same alerts and reports if you want to, but this first one is going to be the default. That one is going to be assigned directly to the admin account on the box. Select the type of deployment that you want to be setting up. I'll just select other, and your time zone. From there, as I said before, it shows you the network cards that are available on the device. If for whatever reason, if you have multiple interfaces here, if you want to use a different interface for the external, other than what's already assigned, you can use these crosshair icons and drag and drop those interfaces. And as you can see, the devices change. So ETH0 and ETH1 have now reversed. So if you had 5 interfaces and you wanted to use ETH4, the last interface, you can easily click and drag that up to be identified as the external interface. And then once you've selected the interface, you move on to actually configuring your external interface. You can configure this for DHCP, a static IP address, or even PPPoE. If you select status, configure your IP, netmask, gateway, and DNS. And if you're using PPPoE, all that's going to ask for is the username and password associated with that connection. And then it will automatically try to connect and get the IP information that is assigned from your ISP. I'm going to go ahead and go back to using DHCP. As you can see, this device automatically connected to and received an IP address from the DHCP server that was available on our network. You don't have to actually make any configuration changes here for that to happen. It is automatic. You do have the ability, however, if you want to change the settings that are here. Perhaps you had it powered on in one place and now it needs to be set up on another network somewhere else. The ability to change that information with the Renew DHCP button here. If I were to go ahead and do that, this system would re-request information from our DHCP server, and it would give it the same IP address again. But if it were different, it would change all of the settings that you see over here on the status side. When you hit internal network, it will automatically try to run a connectivity test to verify that those settings are correct. Or you can run it now. If for some reason the settings that you entered are not correct, and I'll just set this up here. If you run this test connectivity, and it'll take a moment for it to resave the settings before it actually runs the test. But when it fails, you'll see a screen that lets you know that it didn't work. And the reason why I want to point this out is this isn't a halt your setup process. You do still have the option, even if this doesn't work, to continue beyond this point if you want to. And I apologize for the delay. This does take a moment or two to save. While we're waiting for this, Shannon, were there any questions in there that we can perhaps address before we move on?
Yeah, let me see. There were a few questions earlier. There was a question, if you could explain the bridge mode again. They didn't understand how the traffic was being scanned.
Sure. So in bridge mode, what happens is the Untangle will share the external interface's IP configuration with the bridged internal peer. So in our use case here, 192.168.200.12 is assigned to the external interface. If the internal interface is set to bridge to the external, it's also going to have that IP address. So as far as the internal network is concerned, there's just the one IP address there, but the traffic is still passing through the Untangle out to the internet. There's still a connection from the internal network to the Untangle, and then from the Untangle to your actual internet gateway.
Great, thanks. And then there was some questions about running Untangle in the cloud, and I think there was some confusion on that. So just want to reiterate, Command Center is our cloud-based centralized management solution for NG Firewall. You can run NG Firewall in 4 different ways: in the public cloud, through AWS, as a VM, as a virtual machine, on your own hardware that meets the requirements, or on one of Untangle's appliances. So it's really up to you in terms of what your cost, what your budget is, and what you kind of want to do. So just wanted to kind of explain that a little bit. Let's see if there's any other questions.
So one of the other things that I'll point out, because it just happened, there are times where when the connection settings are not correct, the system will continue to try to connect to those interfaces. And if they don't work, you lose access to the box. That's one of the downfalls of using a remote connection to the device instead of being connected to it remotely. And I'm actually kind of glad that this came up, because in this particular instance, the only way that we can resolve this is if we're connected directly to that device. I have another device that I can log into to finish showing the setup here. but I'm glad that this happened so we can show this. You can set up the device entirely remotely if you want to, as long as you have your interfaces configured and connected properly. You should be able to connect to that Untangle from any machine on your network. But during the configuration, if something does go wrong, like it did here, the only option that you have is then at that point to connect the monitor and keyboard into the device and finish the setup manually. So the final steps of the setup wizard were to configure the internal interface. And as I said before, those settings are almost identical to the static settings in the external or the internet connection. There's just no DNS settings, and there's no gateway address. Also in the internal interface is where you select whether or not you want to enable DHCP on the interface and whether or not you want it to be in transparent bridge mode. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to our demo box to finish showing you the other things we were going to talk about. So just to show what the bridge mode setup looks like, if you were to select the transparent bridge mode option in the setup wizard, that's going to emulate the same thing that we're doing here. If there were multiple external interfaces or other internal interfaces, if you wanted to, you can select any of those interfaces to bridge this interface to. If, for example, you're using a device with a wireless interface on it, you may want to bridge that wireless interface to your internal interface so that they can share the same IP subnet. Other use cases here are if you have multiple ISPs and you want only certain subnets on your internal network to connect to those ISPs. You bridge the internal to the external, you can do that multiple times. So, internal LAN 1 can connect to ISP 1, and then it's a seamless routing that happens there, so that it's very simple for you to configure that without having to worry about going back and making sure that those devices have access to the internet like they need, while still being able to control what they can and can't access locally as well. So the DHCP server tab, the reason why I wanted to show this, if we were running this device with others connected to the internal network, you would see a list of all of the currently connected IPs that are on the network that are being assigned by the DHCP server. Alternatively, if you happen to know the MAC address of a device and you want to assign it an IP, you can do that without even having to wait for the DHCP leases to be active. You can just come in and manually assign whatever IP address you want to the given MAC address. I'd mentioned the host name very briefly in an earlier slide. This is where you'd set that up. The default here is example for the host name, and domain name is untangle.com. I strongly recommend that you change this to be more relevant to your specific network, and I recommend that for a couple of reasons. Not the least of which is that makes it easier to identify this device in Command Center. If you don't happen to know offhand what the UID is for a given device, the hostname information can help you determine which device you actually need to look at. We also talked about setting up the email on the Untangle, and that's under config email. this field right here is where you would set the from address for alerts and other notifications from the Untangle. Again, the default is untangle@example.com. This should be a email address that is valid, at least on the servers that you're going to be sending these emails to, preferably one that's valid for any email being sent, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. We do offer several different ways for you to configure how the Untangle will send those alerts. The default is sending email directly. Really, all that this is doing is using the Untangle with the email address that you specify to send the email to the recipient. As long as you're using a valid email address as the from address, this should work in most cases. However, we do also offer you other options, including using our cloud-hosted relay server, or even using your own in-house mail server if you want to. And if you select that, you have the options to set up the IP address or host name and the port number, and if necessary, the login. So the other thing that we had mentioned is the application configurations on the box when you finish doing the setup on the Untangle. When you select recommended apps, you're going to automatically get all of our content filtering applications, as well as several other fine-tuning applications like Policy Manager, Directory Connector, our VPN, and WAN failover and balancer. The reason why we talk about intrusion prevention separately is this application specifically requires some extra maintenance and care and attention. You can install intrusion prevention and just turn it on and let it run. However, to get the full power from intrusion prevention, you do need to come in and take a look at configuring rules to make sure that it meets the needs that you have for your network. Was there a question, Shannon?
Yes, there's some questions about, someone was asking about DNS override, if you wanted to show how that would be done.
So the DNS override, I'm assuming you're referring to the DNS override options for DHCP.
Correct.
This is actually done on the interface itself that you're going to be using the DHCP server on. So we would edit the internal interface in this case. We would go into DHCP configuration. And then right here is where you would set that override. What this is, all of these fields are intended for is if you have a device other than the Untangle that you want to handle routing or DNS requests for. So for instance, you have an internal DNS server. By default, the Untangle is going to assign its own IP address as the DHCP, its own internal IP address for for DNS resolution. If you want instead to assign an internal DNS server or really any other DNS server, you can use the override field to configure that.
Great, thanks. There's a question about setting up their own SMTP server. Where can they set the port, SSL, and TLS, sorry.
As far as configuring for things like spam blocker and fish blocker, that is all done in our SSL inspector. So essentially, you would come in here, you would enable SMTPS traffic processing, and then you would need to download the root certificate from the Untangle, install it on the mail server, and then once that is in place, SSL inspector could then start inspecting TLS traffic as it's passing through the Untangle, and then hand it off to our spam blocker and phish blocker for scanning before it gets to your mail server. The other piece of this, just so you can see where it is, in spam blocker, under the email tab and advanced configuration, you need to make sure that this option right here is not enabled if you're going to do that. Otherwise, the spam blocker is just going to pass that traffic through and ignore it completely.
Great. There seem to be some very specific questions. We're trying to assist as possible on the questions tab. However, if you have a very specific questions in terms of your setup, I would suggest posting it on the forums. That is the best way for us to be able to get all the information from you in terms of what you're trying to do, so that we can provide the best answer for you. It's very hard to do that on a webinar. Yeah. If you have a very specific network setting you're trying to do, or a very specific question, please, the forums, or if you have support at untangle.com, we're always there to help you with that. Let's see. We do have a ton of other Tech Talks webinars on our YouTube channel. I know there's a lot of questions about web filter and intrusion prevention and IPS and VPN. We're not covering that in this webinar. This webinar is for configuring and installing Untangle. So if you're interested in learning more about our different applications, please check out our YouTube channel. We have tons of webinars on every possible application you can imagine that will probably answer your question that you're asking us. Let's see. Trying to see if there's any other questions that we can get answered. I think that's it for now, Eric. I'll let you know if there's any others that come in.
Okay. So the other pieces of this that I was going to show that are particularly handy for initial setup and to be aware that it's there is specifically our policy manager. Once you've established a baseline configuration actually, I just saw a question come in that I did forget. I'm going to cover that real quick before we move on to the policy manager. I did mention that you can set up automatic upgrade on the Untangle. You can do that outside of the setup wizard. That's done under config upgrade. And it's just a matter of changing that radio button from do not to automatic, or vice versa. And if you do set it to automatic, you can also set the schedule to do it every day or only on specific days, and also set the time of day. Okay, so policy manager. As I was saying, you set the base configuration quickly and easily through just installing the recommended apps, making sure intrusion prevention is online and running, setting up your level 3 or layer 3 configurations under config network. But then the question becomes, well, what do I do for these other groups of people that I need to give different permission sets to? That's where Policy Manager comes into play. With Policy Manager, you can set up secondary sets of applications to be used and assigned to different groups of people. Essentially, you come in here, the default policy is there already. That's the first policy that is added to a device when you set it up. But then you can add additional policies either as children of the default policy or as separate standalone independent policies. And the reason why we point this out is, as a child policy, it automatically inherits everything from the default. So it's very quick and easy to set up these other configurations without having to start over from scratch every time.
Eric, there's a question about setting up another user's access to Untangle. If you wanted to go over that.
So, okay, so the Untangle, as I said, does have two levels, for lack of a better term, of user. You can create multiple admin users, or you can create reports-only users. And those are set up in two different places. To create additional administration users, you come into Config, Administration, and the very first tab allows you to create additional admin logins. Each of these logins that are on this screen here can be used to log in directly to the Untangle, just like the admin, and it will have full access to everything as if it were the admin. Conversely, if you want to create users that can only view reports on the Untangle without being able to make changes to configurations, you go to the apps, into the reports app, and then this reports users tab. As you can see, the admin user is already here as an admin user. It's the only admin user that gets added by default. If you want to add other admins, they do need to be added here secondarily as well. With this, what you can do is you can add just email addresses if you want to just send alerts and or report summaries to other people, or you can actually set them up with a password as well, which allows them to log into the Untangle, and they'll be restricted to just this single reports tab here and nothing else. So this would be the screen that they would see. And I think, Shannon, with that, I'll go ahead and pass things back over to you.
Sure. Yeah, I think we've answered most of the questions. So if you have more, just please submit those, and we'll try and get to them before this ends.
Yep.
If you want to go to the next slide, thank you.
Yep.
So if this was completely confusing to you and you have no idea to where to start, don't worry. Untangle does offer professional services, whether it's your first time installing Untangle or you're converting from another solution, another network provider, whether it be a competitor or whatnot. We're here to help you convert whatever you have in place there to Untangle. Or if it's been a while for you to have looked at your security settings or your network settings, and you need to just a refresher to make sure that everything that you originally set up is still working, or if your needs have changed in terms of your network. So we do offer those options if you require assistance. You get a dedicated time with a couple of one of our support or engineers who can go through that and make sure you get your all your questions answered. All right, that's that slide. Thank you, Eric. So if any of you have attended our webinars before, we offer our trade-in, trade-up program. If you have an existing Untangle license or appliance and it's outdated, or your licensing has changed, we do offer some discounts for that. Also, if you have a competitor's product and you're looking to switch over to Untangle, we do offer some discounts for that as well. So please just reach out to us at sales@untangle.com so we can figure out how to get you into Untangle and get a better pricing for you. It does not include home. Home is not included for any discounts. Home is already $50 a year. We can't go much cheaper than that. So sorry about that. Let's see. This webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch this at any time. Q&A is not saved, so I would suggest if you didn't get your question answered, or if you did, save that answer, or you can always post it in the forums That is the best way to get an immediate answer from us. Our engineers are always on our forums, so you can get your question answered very quickly. Let's see if there's any other questions that popped up. Let's see, I think that's about it. As always, we're here to help you, whether it be support. Our wiki is our technical documentation. Our YouTube channel has all the videos for every application and network setting that you can imagine. If we haven't covered something, please let us know. We're always wanting to provide better webinars for our customers. So if there's a topic that we haven't covered recently, please let us know. We'd be happy to try that again. All of our information for pricing, including our home, is on our website. We do not hide our pricing, so you can go on our website and check it out. Home is for non-commercial use only, for your home network only. Again, home only, not your business. So it's on the website as well as our pricing. So it really just depends on what you want to do. But if you want to talk to one of our sales reps as well, they're happy to help price anything out for you if you have a very complex network in your business. Sales@untangle.com. You can call us, email us. We're here to help, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you, Eric, for the great demo, and hopefully you got your question answered. If not, please email us or submit on the forums. We'll be happy to answer those. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye.